Hello, and welcome back. In the last video, I talked about why I chose to self-publish and why I created GoldStaff Press. Today, I'd like to introduce the novel that started it all, Staff of Gold. It's the first book published under GoldStaff Press, but in many ways, it's also the culmination of years of writing, rewriting, researching, changing direction, and learning how to build a novel. When people ask where an idea comes from, they're often expecting a single answer. One moment, one experience, one flash of inspiration. For me, it rarely works like that. Stories usually begin with questions, and Staff of Gold began with one very simple question. What if one of history's greatest lost treasures had never actually been lost? That question stayed with me for a very long time. Eventually, it became a novel. Today, I'd like to tell you how. The first question. I've always been fascinated by the gaps in history. Not simply the events themselves, but the things we don't know. The missing documents, the unexplained disappearances, the objects that were recorded centuries ago but have never been found again. History isn't complete. It's full of unanswered questions. And those unanswered questions are often where fiction begins. As I read more about ancient civilizations, early exploration, and archaeological discoveries, I realized something interesting. History is constantly changing. New evidence appears. Long-held assumptions disappear. Entire civilizations emerge from places where nobody expected them. That fascinated me, because it meant history wasn't fixed. It was still being discovered. I began wondering, what if there were discoveries that nobody wanted to be found? Not because they weren't valuable, but because they would change everything. That became the foundation of Staff of Gold.
Building the story. At first, the novel looked nothing like the finished book. The earliest ideas were surprisingly small. There was no secret society, no multiple timelines, no international conspiracy, just a historical mystery. But stories have a habit of asking more questions. Every answer seemed to create another mystery. Why had this object disappeared? Who had protected it? Why had nobody found it? What would happen if somebody finally did? Gradually, the story became larger, not because I was trying to make it bigger, but because each question naturally led to another. Eventually, those questions connected across centuries. That's when I realized the novel needed two timelines. One showing how history created the mystery, the other showing how modern characters uncover it. That structure became one of the biggest decisions in the entire book. Pause. Why South America? One question people often ask is why I chose South America. The simple answer is because it already contains extraordinary history. You don't need to invent wonder there. It's already real. Ancient cities, mountain empires, dense rainforest, lost civilizations, explorers who disappeared, archaeological discoveries that continue today. Reality is often more fascinating than fiction. I spent months reading about geography, exploration, historical expeditions, colonial history, ancient cultures. The aim wasn't to write a history book. It was to create a fictional adventure that felt as though it could exist alongside real history. I wanted readers to occasionally stop and wonder, wait, was that part real? That's always been one of my favorite reactions as a reader.
Research. Research is probably my favorite stage of writing. Many writers begin with characters. Others begin with plot. I often begin with research. I'll read books, academic papers, historical accounts, maps, museum collections, old photographs. Sometimes a single paragraph buried in a history book becomes the seed of an entire chapter. Of course, there comes a point where research becomes procrastination. Eventually, you have to stop reading and start writing. That's often the hardest part, because once the writing begins, you're making decisions. The characters. Interestingly, the characters weren't the first part of the novel. They arrived quite late. But once they appeared, the story changed. Because mysteries don't solve themselves. Readers experience discoveries through people. Characters bring emotion to information, They make discoveries matter. One of the biggest lessons I learned while writing Staff of Gold was that readers don't simply follow plots. They follow people. You can have the most fascinating historical mystery imaginable, but unless readers care about the people uncovering it, the mystery has very little meaning. That lesson changed how I rewrote large parts of the novel.
Rewriting. Like many first published novels, Staff of Gold wasn't written once. It was rewritten many times. Entire chapters disappeared, characters changed, scenes moved. Some ideas survived from the very first draft, others vanished completely. Looking back now, I can honestly say the editing process probably taught me more than the original writing. Every revision asked the same question: does this make the story stronger? If the answer was no, it changed. Sometimes painfully, but always for the better. Why this became the first published book. People sometimes ask why Staff of Gold became the first GoldStaff Press release. After all, I had other completed manuscripts. The answer is quite simple. It represented everything I wanted GoldStaff Press to stand for: research, adventure, history, mystery, strong storytelling, careful craftsmanship. It felt like the right place to begin, not because it was the oldest manuscript, but because it represented the future direction of the imprint. Closing. In the next video, I'd like to take you even further behind the scenes. Rather than talking about the finished novel, I'll show you how I actually plan a book. From the very first notebook, through research, character development, chapter planning, and eventually the first draft. If you've ever wondered how an idea slowly becomes an 80,000-word manuscript, I think you'll enjoy that discussion. Thank you very much for watching. If you've enjoyed learning about the story behind Staff of Gold, please consider subscribing to the channel. And as always, thank you for supporting independent publishing.